welcome to Kidmissing TV. Okay. This is the case of Helen Betty Osbourne, which I just did, and then my battery died. So it's going to go bye-bye. Helen Betty was 19 years old when she was murdered on November 13th, 1971. She was a Cree Indigenous woman from Norway House Reserve on the Pas, Manitoba. She was kidnapped, brutally beaten, brutally raped, and stabbed 56 times with a screwdriver. Organs were ruptured. Bones were broken. Somehow they broke her palate, her cheekbones, the things that were done to this girl. And police didn't take it seriously at first. Then Detective Rob Urbanowski stepped up. I think it's funny. This is my friend's name. If you can't tell, that's a very Polish name. And actually got somewhere with the case himself. Excuse me. Only one person of the 5 that murdered her was actually convicted. One was never charged, one was given immunity, and one was found not guilty. Their names were Dwayne Archer Johnson, James Robert Paul Houghton, Lee Scott Colgan, and Norman Bernard Menger. Johnson was convicted. As Houghton had been acquitted, Colgan received immunity for testifying against Houghton and Johnson, and Menger was never charged. Ow. Sorry. There was a lot of problems with racism, sexism, and it's funny because I first found the movie about this case, which was on the CBC, and I think you can still watch it. Hopefully I can find it for you. Conspiracy of Silence. And it took until 1987. This happened in November of 1971. It wasn't until 1987 that one person was convicted. There have been some things done in her honor, which we'll talk about. She was found by a 14-year-old boy named Kenny Gerba, who was tired of fishing, so went looking for rabbit tracks and found her near what's called the pump house. Him and his father went to police. Initially, they thought that her ex-boyfriend Cornelius Beatty, Bighetty, may have been responsible. He passed the polygraph, and I assume had an alibi. And so, but it was very clear it was more than one perpetrator. The crime scene had been compromised because they didn't take proper evidence because they didn't see her as a human. Unfortunately. And like I started to say, I watched the movie for 2 reasons. One, it's a true crime movie. I watch true crime. And 2, because I knew that my favorite wrestler, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Roderick George Dooms, grew up a portion of his childhood, his young childhood, in the Pas, Manitoba. His father was a policeman there. His father was a national policeman, so they would move him around. Probably RCMP. They would move, I think they said railroad policemen, but they would move him around so he didn't get to know people too well in the communities that he worked. And he was the only policeman at the time on the actual reservation. So, um, now the town of the Pas, outside of the reservation, is a culturally mixed town of European Canadians, Métis, and Cree people. She was attending Margaret Barber Collegiate in the Pas, boarding with a non-Aboriginal family. She wanted to go to college and become a school teacher. But they didn't even have high school, or what they call secondary school, on the actual reservation itself, which is called Norway House Reserve. So she had to board in order to go to school. And then she finished that and continued to board to go on to her collegiate courses to become a teacher. Now, in her honor, well, no, before we get to that, the Aboriginal Justice Implementation Commission conducted its own investigation because there were concerns surrounding the length of time involved in resolving the case. According to the report, quote, Osbourne's autopsy showed that along with well over 50 stab wounds, her skull, cheekbones, and palate were broken. Her lungs were damaged, one kidney was torn, her body showed extensive bruising. And in conclusion, the most significant factors that prolonged the case were racism, sexism, and the indifference of white people. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police officially closed the case on February 12, 1999. A graphic novel came out in 2008, The Life of Helen Betty Osbourne. She was called Betty, by the way, by David A. Robertson. The Helen Betty Osbourne Memorial Foundation launched it. The purpose was to educate youth about racism, sexism, and indifference. A Canadian independent folk rock band called The Wooden Sky produced a 4-song album titled The Lonesome Death of Helen Betty Osbourne, and has also released a song with the same title on their full-length album, When Lost at Sea. A renowned Canadian children's author, Robert Munsch, M-U-N-S-C-H, he had walked to the grave, and 1 year before her perpetrators were caught, which was 1987, in case I didn't mention that. And it changed him. In 1991, a CBC TV miniseries, and this is what I want to find for you that I watched, about her case, about her kidnapping and murder, was made, entitled Conspiracy of Silence. CBC is Canadian Broadcasting Company. There's no phone numbers or anything because this case is essentially solved. Again, it took until 1987, from 1971, to solve the case. Why would you give a murderer immunity? First of all. What was done to this girl? Oh, that's what I wanted to tell you. The University of Winnipeg, or the University of Manitoba at Winnipeg, has a building named in her honor. There is also the school on the reservation, on the Norway reservation is now named after her, because her dream was to become a school teacher. So these educational institutions decided to honor this poor girl. If you watch the movie, subjects are sensitive, what happened to her happened to a lot of women on the reservation to a lesser degree. Rape and beating, because they didn't look at them as human. Unfortunately, and police kind of felt the same way. Because I don't know why. It's kind of like when police, there's a dead prostitute and they call it NIH, NHI, no humans involved. Yeah, that doesn't make special victims detectives particularly happy when they do that. But that's the way they look at it. And that's the way they looked at it with natives. Native Americans, Indigenous peoples, Aboriginal peoples, whatever you'd like to call them, in Canada are called First Nations. Here we call them Native Americans or Indians. Of course, it's become wrong to call them Indians, even though that's what they are. You have to call them Native Americans. In Canada, they're called First Nations. Now, one thing that I didn't discuss the first time I did this was that First Nations, or Native Canadians, were taken at one point away from their families and put with white families and tried to re-educate them to be white in white schools, basically stolen from their families on reservations. This happened, I believe, the 50s through the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. And there was actually a woman on Unsolved Mysteries who found her family who had been taken away in that same manner. And they talked about, trying to retrain these kids to be white. They're not white. Sorry. And it's stupid. And if you had a drop, even here, if you have a drop of Indian, you're Indian. A drop of Indian blood, you're Indian. I do have Indian blood. I have Iroquois on my father's side, and I'm not sure what it is on my mother's side, but I have Canadian Iroquois, First Nations Iroquois. And on my mother's side, I'm not sure exactly, I think it's the Wampanoag, but I'm not sure. And I also have in me something related to that, called Romana Gypsy, which were highly persecuted. Because we've done research because of our Romana Gypsy ancestor. We've done research, and it was absolutely horrible. They're still persecuted to this day in Europe. if I ever traveled to Europe, which I won't be, I wouldn't tell them I got a drop of Roman and a gypsy, let me tell you. You know, I know, you know. Um, so we've got Indian on a couple of sides of my mother's family, actually. So for me, it's kind of personal, you know, because even though I'm mostly European, I still have some of that blood. You know what I mean? And like I said, I saw where it was, and I'm like, it's the 70s on the Palm, Manitoba. Did Roddy live there when that, you know, that kind of a thing. And so I watched it, and it was unbelievably excellent. And I will try to link it. And the elephant in the room, yes, my makeup is a little bit loud today. That's because I did my weekly makeup through the decades on the other channel, which was the 70s. So, God bless you. I will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me. I think it's unfortunate only one of our murderers was convicted. But thank you to Detective Urbanowski. Detective Rob Urbanowski, you deserve all the glory here. Because you didn't care what color she was, who she was a person to you. And I so commend you for that. Thank you, sir. Bye, guys. God bless you. I will see you Friday for this week's Doe Friday. Bye, guys.